I'm Jeremy Singer, president of the College Board, and this is the Education Equation. I've spent my career grappling with what truly drives student success. On this podcast, I'll talk with people who are researching, building, and scaling solutions that matter. Every episode will go beyond the hype and focus on data and evidence to see what's actually working. Let's stop guessing and let's figure out what works. Today's guest is Jim Manley, Chief Schools Officer at the KIPP Foundation. Jim has been in K-12 education for over 30 years as a teacher, principal, and system leader. And he's worked for a variety of well-known organizations, including Teach for America and Success Academy. We talk about the power of high expectations, why consistent systems matter, and how KIPP uses data-driven instruction to help students succeed. Jim also shares why he believes AI can free teachers to spend more time coaching and connecting with students. It's a rich, insightful conversation with someone who's seen it all. Let's dive in. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jeremy. It's great to be here.
So you began your career as a classroom teacher, I believe a seventh grade English teacher in Harlem. How'd you originally get attracted into education?
Yeah, I really was just kind of that graduate who really had not figured out what I wanted to do. This was all the way back in 1988. Teach for America didn't exist yet. And I answered a little memo in the college newsletter for career advising around the opportunity to teach in New York City public schools. Didn't need a teaching license. Went to the meeting. This was a guy who evidently also went to Princeton and convinced, Wendy that this might be a good idea. She since, a couple of years later started TFA. But this was a really, all I did was just take the pamphlet and drive down to New York City Board of Ed and interview for the job from the Board of Examiners or whatever it was called back then. They were their own licensing unit, and started in a career that I had very little training and even less aptitude for when I first arrived, but stuck with it.
That's a great story. You refer to Wendy as Wendy Kopp, founder of Teach for America, huge impact. Little side story. I was in 1990, I applied the second year, I think, or 91 for Teach for America. I didn't get in, sadly. I didn't pass the test, but would have been interesting. I wonder how my career would have veered differently.
I was a recruiter in 91, so I might have.
You may have dicked me. Yeah. I won't hold that against you. All for the better. So you're a successful teacher, and at some point you decide that you want to do more than just teach a class. Take us through what went through your head and how you made that decision and what you did.
First of all, you're very kind to call me a successful teacher. I eventually got there, but it wasn't after some fits and starts. But I taught for a number of years in New York City public schools, then found TFA and worked there for 3 years, founded the DC office of Teach for America, and went to grad school. And at that point had kind of convinced myself, I'd read like the Paul Tough article that schools weren't the answer, and I was going to do housing and urban development. And after doing that for about a week at the Kennedy School of Government, decided, no, education, it's got more answers than housing and urban development. And then tried from there to start my own thing, because that was the small school movement that was happening back in New York City. Tried unsuccessfully. I got an Echoing Green fellowship, but tried to start my own thing. Dave Levin was doing the same thing with KIPP, was much more connected and successful than I was. But I was really intrigued by this idea that, if you could get a bunch of like-minded folks who wanted to shake up the system a little bit, that you could create your own space. And I eventually found a spot in a very mom and pop charter school in Teaneck, New Jersey, where I worked for about 6 years, and as the assistant director and then the director of the upper school. And learned both how hard it is, but also that, there's a lot of opportunity. There's just so much that we assume about schools and the way they need to function that doesn't have to be the case. And that was really intriguing to me. So I found charters to be, a real opportunity to put public policy to a test to see if we could do something different. And for the most part, I found, incredible opportunity and success in that life. But obviously, as we'll talk later, there are many challenges to the charter space as well.
Yeah, of course. And a couple things of your journey. When I advise younger people about their careers, I explain that rarely you can make sense of a career often in retrospect, but rarely does a career, do people have a plan that works? And I love that you start a graduate program, you realize it wasn't for you. You had your own, you started to try to start a charter, it didn't succeed. And again, I think also people learn from not just success, but tremendously from failure. Just real quick, what happened with the charter effort you did? Did you get it off the ground, or did it just, you couldn't find enough interest? What was the blocker?
Back then, charters had not yet been approved. So you still had to do like this small school movement. and I found a job teaching in District 10 where they were interested in trying to start a smaller school. Didn't realize kind of what I had signed on for. I signed on for a school within a school of a failing school that was under a registration review. And I didn't get to pick my own staff. I didn't really get to choose my own curriculum, and so I was managing a group of folks who answered to a principal, kind of loosely affiliated to me. They were calling it a school, and I just quickly realized that this was not the opportunity.
That was a bad situation.
Yeah.
For our listeners, District 10, people forget, but many years ago, New York City was divided into 32 community school districts that were different parts. So they didn't want to be one monolithic school. I love to always challenge people to the fact that one in every 320 people in the United States is a student in the New York City system, just to give some sense of the scale. Tell me how you eventually get to Success Academy.
Yeah. So I was working in Teaneck and was more of a suburban community. It was an interesting community to work in, but my heart was always back in urban education, and it kind of kept my eye on what was happening. I had 2 small kids while I was in Teaneck as well. I was seeing some of my friends who had started charters kind of overwhelmed with the amount of time they were putting into it, and was wondering whether I should do that with 2 small kids. But eventually saw an opportunity with Success, and Eva had some really long, Eva Moskowitz, the founder of Success Academy, has had this kind of wild introduction to what she was trying to do to get people to join, and a really complicated application and interview process. I don't know, something about it kind of grabbed me. It was very different and, not typical in the space, and interviewed with her. And we really hit it off right from the jump. And she told me about her plan to start 40 schools in about 10 years or 5 years. I can't even remember, but whatever it was, it just sounded outlandish that this could possibly happen. But signed on and joined at the very beginning of year 2. So she had run the school with, a retired principal that they had brought over, and immediately Eva realized that this was not her vision for what she wanted to do. So she kind of took over the first school. And then I joined with about 2 other people who were targeted to start the next batch of schools in the quick succession that she had planned to grow her network.
And that's where you end up leading a school in Harlem?
That's right. So the second year, it was 3 years before the first wave of her second group of charters started. And then I founded Success 2, which was located in District 5. And we had all kinds of pushback. She made things difficult by kind of immediately targeting the teachers union. We had protests inside my building. They had Acorn and the teachers union literally picketing in front of my school. It was a great story there of just like New York City encapsulated. We had people protesting out front. These New York City cops roll up and see kindergartners being prevented from coming into school. They immediately just walk up to these guys. They're like, "You're going to get lost right now." And the cops scattered the protesters, and all my parents cheered, and we came in to start teaching and learning. But it was that kind of environment right from the get-go with how charters were received, because we were co-located. We were in a public school building. And so you can imagine some of the tensions that exist unnecessarily, but that existed back then.
We'll get in later into some of the sort of controversies around charters. And as you said, Eva is in her own a bit of a lightning rod. So that makes it even more complex. So but you're principal of the school, and tell us, I think it was recognized as the top performing school in the district. Is that correct? And tell us how you did there. What'd you do?
I spent the previous year working with Eva, and I think we were a great mix of my experience of being in public schools for a long time and understanding the kids and the communities and how we needed to position ourselves, and some good practices in education that I had learned over that time, coupled with just her, just determination to be successful and kind of an unwillingness to listen to old conceits of what necessarily had to happen in public schools or how they had to operate. And she was willing to challenge me constantly as whether or not I was being rigorous enough. I was often saying, "Well, I'm not sure kids could handle that. That seems like a lot to do in first grade." And she would just constantly push and say, "Let's give it a try. Let's see how it goes." And the more that we gave kids, the more rigorous we were. The kids just responded as you'd think they would. They're curious. They're, really eager to take on new opportunities. And what I learned was that it was all the adults who were holding back the students from achieving at a high level. And we really took that seriously as I founded the next school, at HSA2. And we were clear with parents that we were just going to go from the very first day. We were going to begin teaching and learning. We used Success for All and phonics. So we were kind of ahead of the game and doing the science of reading. And we had kids, reading. This was the old F&P test, which wasn't super accurate, but By the end of kindergarten, we had something like 96 or 97% of our kids on grade level. So right from the get-go, we were rigorous. We were following, a little bit of the old school methodology that was in schools that had been pushed aside by Lucy Calkins and other people. And we were doing it the old way and really experiencing great results. And so in the very first year that the kids took the test in District 5, we were the top performing school in District 5, including some of the gifted and talented programs they had started there. So it was kind of a shakeup to the whole system right away.
Yeah, it's funny because the whole language, I don't know, we call it debacle, comes up in almost every conversation. It's so funny. So if you were going to summarize the Success Academy, at least at early on, theory of action, it's clearly about having very high expectations for every student. What else? What are the other one or two things you'd say that was a key part of it, either in Eva's vision or your vision?
I think the two things, one was from Eva and one was from me, just her level of excellence in every single facet of the operation, from the school uniforms to the way that we ran orientation to the degree to which we communicated with parents, and just the aesthetics of the place looked incredible. And that sent a message to our staff right away that this was different, it was going to look different, it was going to feel different, we were going to operate with excellence. It felt much more like a tech startup kind of feel where people just experienced, I better be prepared for this lesson. I'm going to be responsible to drive great results. The person next to me is working super hard. Our recruiting and application process was super rigorous to even attract teachers. We were small enough then to really be super selective with who we brought on. So I think that kind of just commitment and spirit of excellence made a huge impact on my staff and the way that they kind of approached the whole thing. And then I think the piece that I brought was just a real attention to kid curiosity. And, even as I said, it kind of pushed me in that direction, but I just realized and remembered how eager kids are to learn. And so we really just transformed the space into, everywhere you went was a learning opportunity. We put stickers on the floor with all the numbers and the sight words, and, all the walls were decorated with student work and these 3D, bulletin boards really demonstrating what our kids were capable of. And parents would come into this building and just say, like, I didn't even know my kid could do this sort of thing.
Right.
And so I think just that attention to everybody's learning from the moment you get there till the moment you leave. I used to shake kids' hands in the morning and I'd ask them questions in order to get in, and the parents loved it. At first, my staff was like, really, you're going to do that?
What was the biggest stumper of a question you'd ask?
Well, as they got a little older, I realized my kids had zero understanding of geography. So it would be things like, what are the 5 boroughs in New York City? And I'd get like New Jersey, New York, California. And parents were just miffed, right? Like they could not believe, it's like, you don't know the 5 boroughs in New York City. And so, just things like that just really inspired. And then I would take questions from my staff. So they would tell me, we're learning this week the symbols or metaphors. And so I'd ask those at the door. I'd ask chess moves because Success has a real strong chess program. So it really became a whole tradition, and parents got really excited when their kids got in. And of course, I always had a couple, if you got stumped, I had an easy one to let you in the door so that people didn't have to freeze to death. But it made for that whole experience that everybody was learning every day.
Yeah, I was worried you were going to say, like, your question would be like, what's the capital of North Dakota, which is probably not an important piece, but more local made sense. I went to public schools in Tarrytown, New York and Sleepy Hollow. And it was, in the 70s, there was a GM factory there and it was diverse. And what was interesting is my first, second grade teacher, the same teacher, Tom Cataldo, he taught all the kids how to play chess. And everyone's else like, what are you trying to, and we all learned chess. And I would go back every year to play Tom, and all very diverse. So I think there's something there. So tell me, you gave us data about, reading levels at first grade and really impressive stuff of over 90%, meeting some benchmarks. Give me another, I love data. You love data. What are some data that demonstrate the success you had there?
Yeah, the first year in District 5 in 3rd grade, and I won't get it exactly right, but we were in the 60s in terms of percent of kids passing. And the co-located school we were at was in the teens. And so right away, just kind of the level of differentiation that was happening. This is a school that was actually fairly well regarded. When we tried to move in, people were like, you shouldn't mess with this school. It's one of the better schools in District 5, which also gave you a sense that like that was an argument, and they were producing passing rates in the teens. And so, I think right from what Eva had started was an eye-opener to folks. I mean, that was happening. And it wasn't just in my school. She had started 3 additional schools or 2 additional schools and HSA 1 at that point. And they were all in the 60s. I think one school was even in the 70s. And that was just unheard of passive rates in New York City. And that was reading and math. And so this was just a wholesale different look for what had gone on in New York City. I had taught in really failing schools in my entire career where I was happy to get, maybe a quarter of my kids at grade level. And so, you realize the degree to which that becomes baked into how you start to view what's possible.
Let me I'll wear a critic's hat, and
For
I'm not
sure.
necessarily a critic here, but there'd be an argument of, well, you cherry picked the top
Yep.
performing students, so it's not as impressive. How would you answer that challenge?
Yeah, I think, for me, there are absolutely credible arguments to the idea that, parents are a little bit more involved with charters. They obviously seek it out. The application is very simple. It's just putting your name and address down to get in, and then it's a picking from a lottery. So it isn't that, restrictive in terms of, but it does require a parent to even be aware that it's happening. And yet, I think that level of differentiation, might explain 5 percentage points, 10 percentage points, but we were,
Yeah.
double and triple outperforming the local district. And so for me, that was really the central piece of it, is like, you're talking about kind of things at the margins that maybe would explain an 8% gain or something like that. But this is just a completely different set of outcomes. Not to mention, as we started to bring in kids from other schools, and Eva, with my school in particular, tried to do something pretty controversial. This was when Bloomberg and Joe Klein were there to make my school a district school. So they
Right.
were going to close down an unsuccessful school and bring all the students over to be zoned for the charter. That had never happened before. At the end of the day, she lost that, but we still brought in a whole bunch of those kids because we had started the process. And within like 2 years, those kids were all performing at that 70, 80 percentage points. So this was when, an even stronger argument to say, like, these kids hadn't been cherry picked at all. They've been brought from an unsuccessful school and were outperforming.
Those
I-
are great examples. And I think in some instances, if you look at all the students in the geography that were in the public schools that go, there weren't that many performing at that. Even if you were able to cherry pick, which you couldn't, you wouldn't
Right.
have that volume. So I think that is a great explanation. One of the things that I see I mean, it's not breaking big news, but there are great teachers, and many great teachers don't make great instructional leaders, principals, et cetera. And this is not specific to education. There are many great software developers who are phenomenal software developers. And we try to sometimes say, oh, you're great at software. Now you're going to manage a software team. And that often is the worst thing, because they were great at developing software. They're terrible at managing and lead a team. So you made that transition. How do you see that? And when you're looking at potential, like, great teachers, how do you determine when, hey, this person not only is a great teacher, but I think could be a great instructional leader?
I think it's kind of a restlessness in the right way. I think a great teacher who's truly a great teacher doesn't look beyond the classroom walls and say, like, I want to change this policy, or we shouldn't have, lunch at this time. And yet I was constantly looking at and part of that was, I think, born and bred out of being in really dysfunctional spaces for a long time and feeling like, and maybe a little bit of going to public policy school of, this could be done at a larger scale, and getting frustrated with the degree to which, when I was teaching and I finally got decent at it, you would pass kids on to the next grade level and see kids who had made all these
Right.
gains seem to, like, go nowhere the following year.
That's
And
your
so
motivation, but what were the things that made you successful?
I think number one was, I'm a strong communicator, and I've always been good at talking to a lot of different, you have to be really good at talking to a number of different constituencies, from your board members to, the district leadership, but then also parents and students as well. And I think being able to calibrate and find the right way to communicate where you want to be and what you want to do effectively makes a big, big difference. And then I think you really have to have a hunger to do things that make people a little uncomfortable. And teaching isn't always that, right? Teaching is often trying to make sure that your kids are comfortable so that they can learn. But certainly what I saw from Eva and what she got from me was a willingness to say, like, that's the best you can do. That's not good enough. And I hadn't really heard talk like that in education before. No one ever said that to me. I was doing great. No matter what I did, I was doing great.
I really
Yeah.
like that, because I think the difference and I've never thought of it this way, what makes you creating a culture in a classroom isn't the same set of skill that you need to be a leader, where, we all struggle, or most people struggle with giving direct feedback, all of that. I can't tell you how much training we do at College Board to try to help people be more honest with each other and direct, because we know at the end that's valuable, but it's still just, for myriad of reasons, blocks. That's really interesting. I want to jump into KIPP, because that is also, you've had many very interesting segments of your career. So, like, going into KIPP, tell the listeners, what sets KIPP apart from other charter schools? What is it that either the theory of action, how does KIPP operate differently?
I watched kind of KIPP because it was a Teach for America product. Dave Levin and Mike Feinberg were both Teach for America recruits. So I was certainly aware of it. And as it grew, I would hear Eva make side comments of like, they had a great idea to start, but they got misled and, down the wrong path. They're not rigorous enough. And so that was a little bit of my mindset of kind of keeping an eye on KIPP. And then quick funny story is that I met Dave on a school tour because Success was having such outsized results. They had an accelerator tour and were bringing in different charter authorizers. And I met Dave, and of course he hung back. And when we first met, I was like, you got to come work for me. The school's great. This is what I want it to be like. But KIPP's whole operating ethos was much more one, power to lead. So they wanted to find great people and they could just do their own thing. If you were interested in capoeira and did like Brazilian martial arts, you could start a school. And so that worked great for those founders. And as soon as they passed it on, it became much more difficult, which we'll talk about in a second. But what was powerful about KIPP, and I think really, because it was really the original, it was like the OG of charter schools, was this deep commitment to communities and families. And this idea that like, once you are a KIPPster, you are a KIPPster for life. We're going to follow you, through middle school and originally get you into a private school and high school and get you into college. But that real sense of partnership, they were going to do home visits. We were going to be right by your side to and through college, which I found very appealing and kind of went back to a little bit of my more, roots in the classroom. I often joked when I arrived that I was the most left-wing person at Success. And as soon as I took the job at KIPP, I was the most right-wing person. So I think that's what they wanted from me at that point. But they did have a very different view of how to operate with students. And I think I was able to, with Dave, find a little bit of a recorrection, I think, for KIPP to say like rigor was always part of the equation. It didn't, translate as we got a little older. But that's certainly been my take as I've arrived back at KIPP, is that like in none of this did we ever want to communicate that we didn't believe kids could achieve at the highest possible level.
Yeah, so I see the thread of the commonality of being all in with the student and family and being there, sort of saying this is a commitment. And it's interesting because I think TFA, that's one of the many, many virtues of TFA also, that the TFA mafia is probably the strongest group I've ever seen. So much talent has come through there. I'm still trying to imagine a capoeira school. But one of the things is I constantly are trying to find educational interventions, tools, whatever, that have impact and then scale. It's really, really hard. A big part of that, one of the reasons is so much of the initial success is based on the individual. And that is hard to scale because there's only so many individuals. And you mentioned that. I'd like to go a little deeper. So, KIPP tried to find, really early on at least, dynamic, game-changing leaders who could have a vision and deliver on that vision. That's great, but it's not easy to find. Maybe you find 2, 3, 5, maybe even 10, but to find 200 is, I would argue, next to impossible. So they hit that wall. Like, when did they realize that, do you think? And what did they do to shift, saying we're not always going to find this,
Yes.
0.1% type leader?
I think that Dave started to realize it. I mean, I came over in 2015, and I think that was the first point where Dave was starting to see that the results were not growing at the rate, and Success was starting to really outperform. Uncommon had come over into New York City. Another charter group was outperforming. And then, I think the board became aware. They had been used to being the top performing charter in the, in the neighborhood, and suddenly we're not. And then, my set of results came in. We quickly made some changes and we saw double-digit gains in math and reading even in the first year I was superintendent. And I think that moved Dave and KIPP nationally to think that, there was something that needed to be changed in the model. And just about that time the pandemic hit, that really shook things up at KIPP because, as you were talking about, if you don't have strong systems, if you're reliant on individual people and you have a disruption at the level of the pandemic and people leave and you come back to school and there's new folks, if you don't have those systems to back it up. And that's really what we experienced. So we were plateauing as a national organization before the pandemic, but certainly coming back from the pandemic, our scores were not where they needed to be. And we've had a really difficult time getting them caught back up. And it's part of my charge and my current role is to figure that out. So to me, I think it's been an ongoing conversation, but the pandemic certainly more than anything really highlighted the need to have stronger systems, because if you don't have it, you're asking brand new people to know what to do. And that's a big ask.
And give an example of a system element that you think is fundamental to that
Yeah.
you're trying to implement or have implemented.
I'm glad you asked that. I mean, our whole strategy is kind of based on Shamar Jeffries is our CEO of the KIPP Foundation, used to work for Democrats for Education Reform. And so he brings to it a determination to get us back on top, but really has given me and asked me to, what worked for you in New York City, and I kind of listed out a number of systems and habits that we developed at KIPP NYC. And we've really tried to just use those. I mean, we've changed the curriculum to make it a national curriculum in ELA and in math. From my vantage point, that's just kind of the setting of the table. I don't really believe that curriculum drives student learning nearly as much as having great systems, but it's easier if everybody's using the same, songbook. So we've really this year and going forward have dialed down on kind of two really crucial systems. Number one is what we call academic progress meetings that at least every other week you're gathering your data, you're looking at formative data, and you're developing action plans to specifically target what's lagging behind. And you check on that on a very regular basis and have real clear reporting mechanisms. And the second is a coaching model, which sounds kind of standard, like everybody gets teacher coaching. But what we've tried to do is really define that as three specific actions. One is just intellectual prep. Do you really understand the purpose of this lesson and what it's trying to do? Have you written the exemplar for it? So can you, model what kids need to do? The second, you have to be open to getting coached right in the moment, that we call our real-time coaching, and we're going to give you comments as you're teaching. And the third is we're going to gather the student work after it's done. We're going to look at it with you, and we're going to determine whether or not, despite what we practiced and what we went over, like the ultimate determinant of whether you're successful is not me checking a box on a rubric. It's how many kids got the point of it. And to me, and it seems so obvious, and I'm sure your listeners are like, really? That's a breakthrough. But so much of my whole rating all throughout my years of teaching was no one ever grabbed the student work. No one ever said to the kid, they said that was a great lesson. And it was just based on adults sitting and watching it thinking, oh, I really enjoyed that lesson, regardless of what kids got out of it.
Yeah, and I agree. While sounds obvious, the devil's in the detail, how you implement it well, how you stick to it. We have at College Board meeting norms, and they're the obvious things, and yet people fall off and don't follow, and it's really hard to get that. It is very funny. You probably saw me smiling. I ran for a brief time a wonderful organization called Partners in School Innovation in the Bay Area. We worked in the San Francisco Unified School District, Oakland, San Jose. And at the time, we started a little after Teach for America, but the idea was to embed AmeriCorps teams with an experienced instructional leader in schools for like 5 to 7 years. Not that AmeriCorps would change every couple of years, but long term. And our three pillars of our theory of action, you hit on all three. One was high fidelity implementation of whatever the curriculum program. So we didn't sort of take a stand, although in certain places maybe we should have. We were in California primarily. But one was like, hey, let's not quibble on the instructional pedagogy. Let's make sure it's implemented well, because often that's where it's a failure. Two was peer coaching and creating sort of an environment where teachers can help teachers or instructional leaders could. And then three was using data to drive instruction. So all sounds very simple. I could tell you a million stories of why, as you know, that is not simple and often fails. Let's go back to the data. So make your case. It was fun to hear how you KIPP is very aware of the other charter programs and impact as well as the public, but what will be the case for KIPP as far as data? And I know there's some studies that have come out demonstrating that, but share with our listeners.
Yeah. KIPP has kind of two stories at the same time, right? There's the story I just told you about the results plateauing and then post-pandemic not being where they need to be. Yet if you look at some of the, the Credo study, which was this multi-year study where they looked at, and this goes back to an earlier question, parents who applied and didn't get into charter schools and parents who applied and did get into KIPP, and then they followed those longitudinally all the way out into their college outcomes. And we were something like, 2.5 times more likely to graduate kids from college. So these are really profound impacts, which, perhaps we'll talk about a little bit later, because I think from a public policy perspective, you don't see kind of innovations like that delivering at that scale and then not get adopted much more widely.
That's an outsized impact. Yeah, it's hard to argue.
It's really remarkable. And that aspect continues to be such a source of strength for KIPP. The degree to which once we get kids into college, we do counseling with them, we stay in touch, we do many different things to make sure they're engaged and go all the way to and through college. And so those results, continue to be a real strong point of what KIPP does. And my theory is just to imagine how much more successful we would be if more of our kids were at grade level in the same way that, Success Academies and now KIPP NYC, where we our goal was something like having 75% of kids entering ninth grade at grade level, because then high school becomes a very different experience where you're not remediating skills, where you're not still teaching kids how to read. Obviously high school just presupposes a number of, basic assumptions around what kids can do that we're trying to get there. And so that's what we're trying to get back to. But, I think KIPP's reputation in terms of, we like to judge ourselves on what we call the estimated college completion. So we look at where our kids match to schools and their likelihood of graduating a first generation student of color. And we've done a really good job of finding those schools that do a good job of graduating our students, matching them really closely, and then supporting them throughout, but also making sure that, our high school experience really prepares them for some of the rigors of college, but also some of the, we can also talk about like just the transition to going to college, because these are students who, haven't had experience like that before. And so I think KIPP does a really good job of thinking we need to prepare kids for what it's going to be like to be in a predominantly white institution and to have to kind of do, a whole bunch of stuff that's not necessarily part of the high school equation that we're trying to make sure we prepare kids for.
Yeah, that's great that you do that. There's so many programs that have that as a mission. So we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss AI. It's obviously having an impact. Has KIPP started to figure out how to leverage AI?
I think we have. I mean, we've started, certainly. And I'm, old enough to be a little skeptical of kind of educational innovation of, whether we could probably list about 15 of them, what we've heard over the time: individual learning and
Whiteboard, flip classroom,
all the things. AI does feel different in certain respects, but in some ways also, there's been times where I saw the whiteboard, I was like, oh my gosh, so much better than the chalkboard I was on. But AI for me is not one of those things that initially I'm really excited about, right? I see all the potential for students to be disengaged, to wonder why this is relevant anymore. If a computer can write this essay that I'm supposed to write, with 3 prompts, why am I doing it? So that part concerns me. And I certainly, with the addition of cell phones and watching kids being completely disengaged in school, I'm nervous about it. I do see on the teaching side of the equation and the degree to which we can create productivity tools for teachers, I see tremendous potential. And I think our teachers are rightly saying that, just because when you were, a Generation X guy and willing to stay till 10 o'clock at night to finish your lesson plans, that's not a model that I necessarily want to subscribe to. And I'm not sure it was ever a healthy model, right? And so I think we're seeing potential for AI to like grade students' papers and get them back feedback immediately. That's incredibly helpful. I just was in a sales pitch around doing teacher observation, so writing up really pretty accurate observation input on what they saw in the classroom. So I think those aspects are really exciting because it allows feedback to happen that much more quickly. And I think kids benefit from feedback. The part that I worry about is our kids still need this basis of rigor that doesn't seem to be enhanced by AI. At least what I have seen only seems to make kids' lives easier, which is not really what I love kids to have easy lives.
Right. You aren't necessarily, but part of learning is you need some level of friction. It's interesting because I do see, the College Board and our members, we are seeing already, the benefit at a minimum is allowing teachers, professors, instructional leaders to be much more efficient and take some of the tasks that frankly they view as more laborious and time consuming, whether that is grading, it can speed up the grading or replace the grading. It can, as you said, setting up the actual lesson plans, et cetera, et cetera. So there's, a million things that can either accelerate or replace tasks that teachers do. What would you say, like, hey, teachers have, let's say we figured some of the stuff, they have 40% more time, 40% of what they were doing gets done by AI. What would you want the teachers to replace that 40% with?
Yeah, I feel like when I was a successful teacher and I stopped talking all the time and sat side by side with students as they wrote, that was some of the best kind of back and forth, and kids saying like, slow down, those are great ideas. Give me a chance to go try and put some of those in place, right? Like that is the opportunity that it feels like AI could grant us, right? So I don't have to sit at the front of the room marking up everybody's, comma mistakes, and instead can really sit side by side through the, the idea generation piece, the revision piece, and also to make sure you're not using AI. Because I think so much of the work now has to be done in class. I think there's obviously room for doing homework assignments, and you'll probably recognize when your kids, one of the pieces is, our kids are getting so sophisticated, they even now put in errors.
There's actually AI can do that for you to like make it less recognizable.
But to me, it just frees, the teacher not working productively with kids in the room is a loss at this point. So if AI can just make sure that the vast majority of the time that you're instructing, you're letting students do work and you're observing them do the work and you're giving them those kind of real-time coaching and feedback pieces. To me, that's really the game that, feels kind of old school, but is really where kids learn. And I think even some of the gains that you've seen from kids using AI, some of the studies have shown that, a few weeks out, it all dissipates. And so there is something about the human relationship and getting feedback and the back and forth that happens in any conversation that I think I would hope that AI could really get us back to, like, when I walk into a classroom and I can't find the teacher, I know that I'm in a good classroom.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I don't think anyone would argue. And I like the vision. I think that will manifest. I also think the risk is real. We don't have time to go into it now, but we're spending a lot of time at College Board because, for example, in the writing process, there are parts that early on the writing process, if a student is using AI or, mostly relying on AI, they don't develop certain skills. Later in the writing process, it's actually quite useful and efficient. It doesn't stunt their writing growth. So we're trying to come up with models and technology that allows students to still build the core skills that they may be losing. So stay tuned on that. You mentioned some of the policy angle. If you're stepping back at the policy level, what do you think needs to change, whether it's relevant to charter or more broadly, not toward AI or can be toward AI, but more generally, you just have a great perspective on that.
Yeah. Right now it feels kind of like, is there any policy that's happening right now in education? It feels like a kind of a space where we're walking away. And what's frustrating to me is that so many answers have become clear in the last 10 or 15 years. The science of reading, even the work we're doing now with our middle schoolers to get them caught back up on, lagging skills. We're DIBELS testing, which is an old school
of course,
foundation, but we're doing it up for our 8th graders, and there's more like choral reading and having them read out loud. All those things we were told not to do are actually really helpful to kids who have lagging skills. That to me is an encouraging aspect of public policy. I do see, and here, like, red states, I think, are ahead of blue states and saying we need to do more with foundational literacy. We need to have it expand into upper grades. I think that movement, if we can continue it, would be a strong one to make sure teachers are all trained in the science of reading. That to me is exciting. I think on the other side, the movement towards private school vouchers are concerning to me. It feels like we've lost the lessons of what was happening in schools where, what I think works about charters is you still have to meet the rigors of the public school experience. Kids need to, special needs need to be attended to. You have to make sure this is for all students. You can't kick kids out, and you have to have rigorous measurement systems in the public. That concerns me on all of those levels, because I think charters have demonstrated that if you give people, you put the net up, you say these are the rules of the game, so you got to operate by, public school standards, but within that, we want to innovate and allow kids to, to be challenged and to do work that's really meaningful to them. And then you get these results that success in KIPP and Uncommon and Achievement First, IDEA, who have really changed the policy game. It would seem, if you had this kind of level of outsized response in a cancer trial, you would immediately take people off the placebo and say,
right, do it. Yeah.
And we're not doing that. So to me, that's such a loss of the conversation that we've got to get back to, is that we actually know a lot more answers than we think. And we need to bring it to parents to say, like, your kids don't have to get these kinds of results. They could be doing so much better, but we've got to be serious about it.
Yeah. And I just want to say about private vouchers. I just want to underscore your point, which is a lot of success. If you don't measure things, it's very hard, if not impossible, to demonstrate success. And your fear is also my fear, not just with schools, but more broadly in education, that, we're losing some common metrics. And if each school or district or state has their own measures of success and they don't sync, we're not going to know what's working. And that's a bit terrifying. With my guests, I do a rapid fire round. So these are very short answers. I have 4 questions for you. First is, what's one educational buzzword you wish we could retire?
Developmentally appropriate.
That's great. I love it. I won't go more. I think people will understand what that is. 2, what's your favorite book about education, or one that has deeply shaped your thinking?
Why Students Don't Like School by Daniel Willingham.
That's mine. That was my favorite too.
It's so good.
It's so good. And for those who don't know, I think it's the best example. There's a big gap between, we'll talk, I'm hoping to have Daniel at some point, but there's a big gap between, there's all this cognitive and behavioral science research about how people learn, but the application is quite difficult to apply in a classroom. And he sort of, it's the best illustration of ways you can turn it. So I love that we love the same book. 3, name one thing that you're bullish on around the future for learners.
Yeah, I think giving teachers more time. I do think AI can give teachers more time, and that as long as they focus on the right things, on student outputs, it would be great.
And last one class you wish all students, whether high school class, college class, whatever, had to take.
I think I'm going to go back to geography. I think the kids' appreciation of just how big the world is and how much there is that we can still learn about is, I'm shocked by the level of even some of my most outstanding kids in senior year of high school who still can't tell me more than about 3 foreign countries in the world. So I feel like we've not done a great job there.
Great. So Jim, thank you so much for everything. One last question for our listeners. Any parting thoughts, any one big message you'd like to send when you have this opportunity?
Well, thanks for that. The piece that I'm constantly, and it came out in the interview today, but we know so many of the answers of how to create great schools and how to reach kids and let them maximize their incredible potential. And the fact that we don't do that at scale as a country just feels like such a missed opportunity for us. We talk all the time about things that we're not tapping into as a country. But for me, just the potential of our kids and the degree to which we write it off every year is just, that's the way it goes. And our NAEP scores don't increase and all these other things that are telling us, blinking red, be concerned. And we know the answers. We've got schools that are just performing at incredible levels, delivering results for all kinds of students with different backgrounds. Just, you can point to so many places where in medicine and other places, we don't know the answer. We don't know the answer. Here we do, and we're not doing enough about it. And that part is hopeful. I'm hopeful that somebody can pick up that banner in the future and demonstrate that that's a giant win for our country and for our kids if we could put that all together.
Yeah. And I'll say the whole premise of this podcast is there's very few things that have been proven. So it even more imperative when there is a success that has scaled that we continue to scale it, as you said. And it's even more important because there are so few within education that have shown success, continued success. So keep up the wonderful work. You've devoted your career to it. You're having a real impact and you're really inspiring. So thank you so much for the time, Jim.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today. Join the conversation by following The Education Equation wherever you listen to podcasts.